Yeah, we don't want to do anything to scare your children.
Welcome to Straight Up with Kevin Carter, a retired veteran and decorated police officer with over 17 years' experience, tackling current events, local, state, and federal, covering today's topics and events with special guests. And now, here's your host, Kevin Carter.
All right, thank you for joining me again, coming to you from High Top Studio 71. I want to talk to you today about something that's pretty near and dear to me because, A, it was my efforts that got it going. To catch a predator. I talked briefly about it in a previous podcast, and I've received a ton of requests about going into it deeper and diving into it and explaining everything that happened. And I'm not even going to lie, because it was in 2006, so it was quite a while back. I actually had to go online and research and do some refreshing of my memory of some of the names and stuff. And in doing so, I'm just going to tell you right now, if you don't like foul language or things, the nature of this podcast, there's going to be some stuff in here you probably, it's not going to be good for children, okay? I'm just going to go ahead and warn you now, there'll be some bad language in this, and the graphic nature of the actual podcast itself, and it is not going to be for anybody for the faint of heart, okay? Because, number one, some of the stuff I read online about people throwing in, accusations and stuff like that, that stuff just pisses me off because they don't know, they weren't there. What you're going to hear today is the truth. It's a firsthand account because I am the guy that brought the idea to the chief and got it all started. So with that, I'm just going to start out with, in the state of Texas, the Penal Code 33.021 states that online solicitation of a minor is a third-degree felony if they're over 14 years old, if it's a second-degree felony if they are younger than 14. And what they mean by online solicitation of a minor is if in any type of sexual, graphic-orientated text, pictures, anything like that of a minor, you can go to jail for that. And it clearly states in the Penal Code it is not a defense to prosecution that the meeting did not occur. So, 2006, we were sitting at home one night, and I happened to see an episode of To Catch a Predator, Dateline NBC. And I was just taken back by it, how bold and brazen some of these people were that were doing this and showing up at these houses, and it was just mind-boggling to me. So I, just being the research nerd that I am, I started diving into how bad was the problem? Well, it was worse than I ever suspected. Worse than narcotics, because there are no socioeconomic boundaries when it comes to perversion. I mean, it happens. I mean, look at, case in point, look at Jeffrey Epstein. What's come out of that whole deal? A lot of accusations, but one of the, was it Prince William, just settled a lawsuit because there was a person trafficked over to Great Britain to them for whatever purpose. So you can go look that up. But it's bad. We live in a terrible society when it comes to that. So anyway, I did a lot of research into it, and so I just thought, what if I did this here, locally, and arrested some, got some bad guys off the street, took that to the chief. Chief says, let me look at it, let me study it. And then he says, hey, a couple days went by. He says, come back in here and talk to me. So I go sit down with him, and he says, you can do this under one condition. You have to stay home. Has to stay right here. You can't go willy-nilly all over town, all over the DFW Metroplex, state of Texas, whatever. You have to stay close to home. So I reached out to the group Perverted Justice, which you can check their website out. And I'm just going to warn you before you do, there's some graphic content on that website. If you're of the faint of heart, like I say, you don't want to go on there. But what they do is they're an organization that goes out. They're a group of volunteers. And what they did for us is they provided the manpower that we just did not have in the budget. Even a department in Collin County, which is one of the highest paid counties in the state as far as police go, we just didn't have the manpower and the budget to do what it is they could do because they had volunteers everywhere. So what they would do is set up a proxy server that we had access to, and then they would chat with these people in these different chat rooms all across, the United States. And I was able to set the parameters on what it was that I would take or what it was I wouldn't take, meaning police officer. So first and foremost, I told Perverted Justice, okay, if you do this, you have to do it on this proxy server to where we have access to everything all the time. And in that way, there's a chain of custody for the evidence. At that point in time, then you cannot initiate any type of sexual contact with these people. It has to be their idea. So that way they can't say entrapment, which that's the first thing everybody screams. Well, you entrap these people. No, nobody forced them to do that behind that keyboard. They did it on their own. The second thing was no profanity. You couldn't. It doesn't matter how bad the chats get on the other side. You couldn't go there. We wanted to try to maintain some type of professionalism, even though these people thought they were talking to 14-year-olds and under. And then after that, I would take each case on a case-by-case basis as if I would act on them or not. Because if the elements of the offense were not there, I wasn't going to do it. And so in the first 2 weeks, I made 4 arrests. So the very first 2, they never even showed up. They did all the chatting online. We had everything we needed from them. And one of these individuals was actually at work and dropped their pants and showed their penis and took pictures of it and sent it. It's a grown man now, okay? Took pictures of his penis and sent it to what he believed was a 14-year-old girl. Anyway, the other one was a young man that sent nude photographs of himself to what he believed to be a 14-year-old girl as well. But they never would commit to meeting anywhere in the city of Murphy. So I called them, and they agreed to come in and answer some questions, which ultimately got them both arrested. And the one individual that was at work pled guilty to the case. Now, keep in mind, Collin County took both of these cases, okay? Prosecuted both of these guys. Perverted Justice, City of Murphy Police Department, myself as the arresting officer, all the evidence was gathered through this proxy server, the whole 9 yards. So then, fast forward a few days, I get a phone call one night. I'm actually on shift, and they have a man that is coming to the 7-Eleven in Murphy to meet what he believes is a 14-year-old boy. It's okay. So one of the things that they like to do on these is, in order to confirm that we have the right person, is we would do things like, okay, keep in mind, they think they're meeting a child. So these people go into great lengths to groom these children into meeting them or feeling safe with them or whatever the scenario is. So on this particular incident, I believe it was, I don't remember what it was. They asked them to bring them a big bag of Skittles, something to that effect. So when we encounter that individual, one of the first things we're going to be looking for is that trigger item, that item that was requested in that chat log. And every one of them is going to be different because that's the key to, it's just a key to the piece of the puzzle. So sitting outside or sitting down the road from the 7-Eleven, they're, via communication with this person, and lo and behold, Guess who shows up at the 7-Eleven? And guess who's there to greet him? Me. I go up to the vehicle, and what do I see sitting in the front seat next to him? A big bag of Skittles. I'm like, okay, get him out. What are you doing here? Of course, he's going to try to BS me. He's, the whole 9 yards. Turns out this guy was staying in a motel in downtown Dallas, worked for the Department of Defense. We arrest him based on all the evidence that we had at that time and charged him with online solicitation of a minor and took him down to the PD, impounded his vehicle, and then they got a search warrant for the motel room where he was staying. And then when we executed the search warrant on the motel room, we found the laptop that was still open and still had the chat log up where he was chatting with the individual online that actually he thought was a child that subsequently put him at the 7-Eleven. So we had an open and shut case against this guy. And the sick part about it was this guy shows up thinking he's going to meet a young boy, 14-year-old boy, has a bottle of KY jelly in his front pocket. So he was completely prepared for the encounter. And then fast forward, he got prosecuted. The Department of Defense was quite interested to know why we had their laptop in evidence. And that in itself turned into quite the circus because some people from Washington, D.C. Were in Murphy pretty quickly trying to find out where that computer was because it had some top secret stuff on it. So those are all things that were handled above my pay grade. The chief got to deal with that. But as you can see, this is this type of crime is, and it's still happening today. Don't make no bones about it. It's still happening today. But the next guy, I get a call. It's actually, I'm off that day, and I get a call, and this guy shows up. He's supposed to meet a young girl at the same 7-Eleven. And in 2006, the technology was not as prevalent as it was now. So I'm sitting at the 7-Eleven in my personal vehicle, just kind of scoping things out. And I happened to catch a guy sitting in his vehicle looking at a road map, a paper road map. I know a lot of you hadn't seen one of those in a long time. Anyway, it was just because we kind of lost communication with the guy. He just kind of stopped communicating. I don't know if he got scared or what. And I just said, what are the odds? Because we knew this guy was coming from East Texas. We knew he was coming from Tyler. He was driving all the way to Murphy to meet what he believed was a 14-year-old girl. And we just couldn't get a whole lot of information out of the guy, but we did know that much. And then we were able to get a description at the very end of what he was driving. And so, which it was a very generic vehicle, one that they made a whole lot of. And so I'm sitting there and, lo and behold, there's a couple of these particular vehicles that color in the parking lot. And I'm just like, man, I don't want to, I got to be right because I only get one chance at this. And this guy whips this map out. And I'm just like, okay, that's a red flag. What's a guy doing here with a map? And anyway, all the bells and whistles just started going off. Well, as soon as he got the map out, he puts it back down and he drives out of the parking lot. Well, I'm on the radio in my portable, I'm in my personal vehicle, calling for a marked unit to pull this guy over for me. So we catch him up at the end of the street and get him pulled over. And one of the things that we asked him to bring was a stuffed teddy bear. That's what he was supposed to bring. And as soon as I walk up to the vehicle, I'm in plain clothes. I had my badge and everything out, and I identified myself. And I asked him, what was he doing in Murphy? And he got out of the vehicle and handed me his card, and his name was Oliver Geffey. He was a world-renowned eye surgeon. He handed me his card. He says, I'm a doctor. I said, I understand that. That's not what I asked you. I asked you what you're doing in Murphy. And he said, I need to talk to my lawyer. I said, okay. So I asked him to stand at the back of the vehicle. I said, was there anything in the vehicle you need me to know about or anything like that? I asked for consent. He gave it to me, and I found the teddy bear. in the back seat of the vehicle, which was not really, I guess, the cement for the case. It was what was found beside the teddy bear, which was a piece of paper with written directions, as were discussed in the chat log, to the 7-Eleven in Murphy. So anyway, this guy was placed in custody and taken to the station. We booked him in, and long story short, the next day I'm getting ready to work, and I get called to the chief's office. Never a good thing in police work anyway. I walk in, and there's a assistant U.S. attorney sitting there from the Marshall Division. Stood up and introduced himself, and he says, "You must be Officer Carter." And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "I just want to commend you on your work and your report writing ability." I said, "Well, thank you. You know, what's this about?" He said, "Well, Mr. Vigaffi is a big fish that we've had our eye on for a long time, and he's a descendant from the Shah of Iran. He's been on a terrorist watch list, all of that stuff," which at that point in time, it was, the whole terrorist thing was still fresh. We were only 5 years out from 9/11, so it was still fresh on a lot of people's mind, more so than it is now today. Anyway, we go, and he says, "We're taking this case over." And I'm like, "Okay. What does that mean?" I mean, because that's the first time I had any dealings with the feds. And he says, "Well, if we can execute the search warrant and all that on his home, which is what we had already done, and we do the forensics on his computer, every child pornography photograph that he possibly has, every image is 5 years in federal prison." Well, federal prison is day for day. There's no good time. There's none of that with it back then anyway. So I said, I don't have a dog. I don't have a say in that matter. I'm just I'm just a patrolman. I only been on the job just for a short time. So I am just loving life that I'm getting to even do this. And, I'm enjoying it. I'm having so much fun because I am making a difference. I am solving the world's problems, one pervert at a time. And I said, "Okay, no problem." Well, then he comes back and says, "Well, this guy's hired like one of the best top attorneys in Northeast Texas." And I said, "Okay." I said, "I'm not worried about a defense attorney. I've been against them already in my career, with other cases, thefts, DWIs, things like that." I said, I'm pretty confident in my ability in gathering evidence and writing reports and doing what I'm supposed to do, and according to the Code of Criminal Procedure, the CCP. So we go along, and a few days go by, and I get a call. So the feds take the case. I get a call one day from this U.S. attorney, and he says, "Officer Carter, we have a problem." I said, "What's the problem?" He says, "I don't show in here in the report anywhere where this gentleman was Mirandized." And I said, "Yes, he was." I said, "I've got proof of it." And I said, "If you watch the video interview that we did where he asked for a lawyer," which it was a very short interview because he asked for a lawyer, but we read him as Miranda right there, and he signed a piece of paper that he acknowledged we read him as Miranda. And of course, when we do those reports, we would scan all that stuff in and attach it to the document in the computer. So anyway, it was all there. Somehow or another, it got missed when the file got transferred to him. So I went back in, was able to find it, email it to him, and he was just like, "Oh my God, this just saved our entire case." I was like, "Great." Well, they wound up kind of, I guess, doing the whole lawyer thing back and forth. And then I get a phone call one day with, "Congratulations, Vigaffi pled guilty to 5 years in federal prison for online solicitation of a minor. He's going to prison." And I was just like, wow, that's amazing. So here we had 4 convictions right out the gate, no problem, no issues. I mean, it was just like, for the lack of a better term, shooting fish in a barrel. Everything was just clicking. Well, then out of the blue on a weekend, I get a call from an unknown number in New York. I didn't know the number. So I answer the phone. It's before car warranties. So I answered the phone call, and person identified himself as executive producer for Dateline NBC. And I was like, wow. Anyway, they wanted to do a show in Murphy. I was like, they said, matter of fact, they've never done a show in Texas, period. And they really they've seen my work. They've seen how successful I've been. My contact at Perverted Justice, he had a pseudonym name. He went by Frag. And Frag was bragging to Dateline NBC of how well I responded, how fast I responded, how diligent I was, but also how regimented I was. I held them to a higher standard, if you will, to make sure all the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. Because I did not want to, I was still new. I just didn't want any problems. I was still very new to the game, but I'm still that way today. I'm very regimented, disciplined. Everything's got to be just right. And so, anyway, I was like, I can't make that call. So I will call my chief and give him your number. So I called Chief Myrick, and he says, I'm going to have to talk to city manager because this is a big deal. So he talks to Craig Sherwood, city manager. And Mr. Sherwood gave his blessings according to Myrick. I wasn't part of that meeting, but I can assure you Myrick would have not went forth with this had Craig Sherwood not gave his blessings on it. So before we go any further with that, Myrick says, let's go talk to the district attorney in Collin County. I said, okay. He said, I want you to go with me because you have put these 4 cases together. Keep in mind, these 4 cases that have already been prosecuted, and one even on a federal level. He said, I want you to go with me because you understand the lingo, you've wrote the reports, you understand the process, so if they have any questions, you can answer everything. I said, no problem. So we sit down in front of the assistant district attorney, who was the lead assistant, and we tell him what we're doing. And he says, I've seen the cases. He said, you put together solid cases like that, bring them to me, and we will prosecute them. I will tell you right now, there is a ton of bullshit out there on the web right now that says the DA said otherwise. I'm going to tell you here today, I was sitting in that meeting when they told Chief Myrick and myself that they would prosecute them cases. So if they say anything different, they're trying to save their own ass or cave into political pressure, which is something that several different reports have said. NBC News, ABC, CBS, all of them jumped on the bandwagon when all this thing went south. But anyway, getting ahead of myself. They said, yes, they'll prosecute them. So we go back, and Chief talks to Dayline NBC. Of course, we already had a relationship with Perverted Justice. And they said, okay, we got to find a house in the city of Murphy. Okay, no problem. They said, Kevin, you're already there. We're not. If you find a house that we could rent for X number of dollars or whatever, we would love for you, to let us know. So I find a house in a subdivision. I send them the phone number, and they emailed the realtor on it. They told the realtor exactly what they were doing. I saw the contract that they sent the realtor because I asked to be involved with every aspect of this, just because if anything, I didn't want the department getting a black eye. That was the last thing I wanted to happen. And so I wanted to make sure. And so they were very clear what this was going to be used for. It was going to be used for an undercover sting. It was going to be used, and the house would be on national TV. And the realtor even said, I think that's great. That's great. And so they rented this house for a weekend, and I believe the fee was $2,500 for a weekend. Like, I think they agreed to 7 days because they had to have a couple of days to set up and a couple of days to take down all of the stuff. And we were there for 3 days. So anyway, I believe it was 7 days. Don't quote me on that. But I do remember it being $2,500 for a weekend, a week, basically. which back then that was just like, they were just ecstatic to get that. And they agreed to it, and they signed a contract that allowed them in the residence for that period of time. Since then, the stories have come out that the realtor didn't know anything about what was going on, and that's horseshit, because I read the contract. It was very, very clear. What Dateline did tell him was he couldn't disclose anything about the operation that was going to happen there until after it was over. Reasonable expectation. Don't want to tell the whole world we're fixing to do a sting to catch a bunch of perverts. And so they were clear about what they wanted. There's been so many lies about that. And I'm just telling you right now, that's exactly what they are, lies. I read the contract. I seen it. I know what it said. I know I know they signed it and sent it back, and I know they took the check for it. So you can't come back and claim you didn't know later. Anyway, we set up, Perverted Justice comes in, Dateline NBC brings their crew in. They had, I think, 7 cameras in the house and 7 cameras outside down the street. Had this just amazing operation going on. It was a new neighborhood, so there was people moving in and out, in all the time, houses being built. There's actually a brand new house right next door to the house that was rented. So we didn't have a place as officers to be the takedown team. So what happened was they rented a U-Haul, parked it in the driveway next door, and we stayed in the U-Haul, the takedown team. And I'm just going to tell you right now, it was colder than hell out there. And so what we would do, we were 6 men. We stayed in that U-Haul for 14 hours a day, usually sometimes longer. And we would go out 3 at a time, takedown team. And if that team got busy, main road run behind the house was Betsy Lane. So if we caught one too close to the other, we would just take them between the house out the back gate to Betsy Lane and put them in a squad car, so not to spook the next pervert, because they were coming in that fast. So in 3 days, I believe it was, we caught 24 perverts in that amount of time. The scary part was, in that amount of time, Perverted Justice had started like that Monday, started chatting up, trying, putting their decoys online, in Murphy. And by the time the sting was over, they were chatting it up with, I think it was somewhere between 600 and 700 people, potential perverts that were either on the verge or whatever the case was, to come to Murphy. And needless to say, I've got a list here of every one of them. What I'm not going to do is I'm not going to use their name. One of them I will, because I think he deserves it, and personally. But anyway, he was the one that caught the most media attention. Louis Conrad. He's the only one that did not show up to the house. And remember, I told you in the beginning, it's not a defense prosecution if you don't show up. You commit the crime the minute you show intent to come. So he had already crossed that threshold. But see, what they did not tell you is every one of these cases, I was right outside in that U-Haul truck. Every one of these cases that they didn't have carte blanche to just tell us, go arrest that one, go arrest that one. That's not how that worked. That's how the media sold everybody on it. What they failed to tell you was Frag and his associate had to bring every case that they had that was fixing to show up out to that U-Haul to me, for me to look at all the evidence and check all the boxes to make sure they fit the elements of the offense. If they didn't, I didn't give the green light to arrest that person. And that person got to drive on down the road. And it wasn't because I was almighty. It was just because I knew what I was doing. And the chief had said, he's the point person. So when I tell you I know this from the inside out, it's because I saw every single case before anybody left the truck, before anybody inside talked to those people, before anything happened. I knew about it. And I was the one that said yes or no. And I said no on some of them just because they didn't check all the boxes. And again, I did not want something that wasn't right. So one of the first guys that we had show up there, he was, we learned later on, was a very wealthy individual. He owned multiple McDonald's in the DFW area. He drove up at that point in time in a brand new Lincoln pickup truck. If you remember those, when Lincoln was making trucks, drove up in a very nice truck. And any of this information is on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and just put in Murphy, Dateline, NBC, Sting, and oh my God, the videos are there. And I'm in several of them, coming around the house as part of the takedown team. So I'm not going to tell you anything that you can't verify. What I am going to tell you is a lot of stuff that they failed to tell you, or they twisted up in some of these news articles on. I know 2020 did a news article and just twisted it all up because it was their competitor that was doing it. So yeah, they're going to twist the shit up because they don't want their competitor getting better ratings than them. So if they can get on TV and berate their competitor, what do you think they're going to do? It's kind of like what Trump has been saying. It's fake news. This is exactly what was going on here, is a bunch of fake ass news because they kept saying stuff that was not true. This gentleman, though, he came up there in this truck. He never got out of the truck. He was stopped down the road eventually and taken into custody. The sad part about it was this guy, he was a very, very influential individual. And I'm not big on conspiracy theories, but I will tell you that this individual owned multiple McDonald's franchises. And if you do your homework, go look at what it costs you to start a McDonald's franchise. It's somewhere in the tune of around $2 million. Okay. We later learned that this individual was a huge donor to the sitting district attorney in Collin County at the time all this went down. Okay. Keep that in mind. Just keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to that in a little while. Anyway, we arrested this guy, and the list just started compiling from there. We actually had one guy that came there that actually lived in Murphy, a few blocks from my house, where I had a son who was in junior high school at the time. Okay. So let me just tell you, when I took this shit personal, it was personal because this guy lived right around the corner from my house. And he was one of the only ones that we were able to get actually from the actual city where we were at. We had one guy that was from Denton, had an address in Oklahoma, and then he had an address in Denton. We had one guy that showed up. He was an oil consultant, which right after he was caught, he wound up getting a divorce. And then later on, he was arrested again for soliciting a decoy. And then he had also, it was later revealed after this that this guy had actually raped a child and a woman, which he ultimately wound up getting 24 years in prison. Keep that in mind because this could have all been prevented. We had another guy that came all the way from Kennedale, Texas, and he was actually an executive for a company over in Kennedale. And then we had one that drove all the way from Houston, okay? Drove all the way from Houston, Texas. The problem with this cat was when all of this went down, of course, I'm going to fast forward just a little bit. The DA, the political pressure that came out of this, the DA did a complete 180 on us, totally dipped us in the grease, being the police department, and said that they had told the chief not to do this because they felt like Dateline NBC was calling all the shots, which wasn't true. They felt like Perverted Justice was a vigilante group, which wasn't true. Keep in mind, they've already prosecuted 3 of these guys, and one of them got prosecuted in the federal court system. So How is the evidence today the same evidence not good tomorrow? I don't get that. I didn't understand that at all. But this guy showed up from Houston, and when Harris County learned what Collin County did, Harris County called myself and the chief and asked, could they have our case file? Because, see, here's the deal. Because he lived in Harris County when he did the communication, and he came to Collin County to do the meet, technically he could have been arrested in either county because the crime actually started in Harris County and was concluded in Collin County. So when Collin County decided they weren't going to prosecute these assholes, Harris County prosecuted this individual, and now he is a registered sex offender for the rest of his life. Kudos to Harris County for doing that. The other guy that we got, that he caught probably almost as much attention as Mr. Conrad, because, and the only reason he didn't catch more is because Mr. Conrad killed himself. But this guy was a Dallas school teacher. Even after the case was dropped against all of these guys, this guy left, went to Indiana, and got a job there as a teacher again, but then was fired in 2014 after they discovered he had been on national TV. And then a whole bunch of stuff came out about this guy. There was videos of himself doing some sexual stuff online, just a whole bunch of stuff, but he ultimately died in 2017 of cancer. We had another gentleman that showed up in from Louisville. We had one that came from Carrollton. This guy was really a character because he actually brought a cock ring. And when he was confronted with the fact of why he would have brought something like that to meet a 14-year-old girl, he tried to tell everybody that this was a finger indexer for papers. It wasn't actually what we thought it was. I guess he thinks we were stupid. And then we had the one that he had the most unusual screen name on there of all of them. Twink Toilet was what he was called. He ultimately was released according with all these other guys, but then he later bragged to a coworker after all of this. He was so elated that he got away with this that he had bragged to a coworker that he had went to Australia with a teenage boy in 2012 and had a sexual encounter with this young boy in Australia, and then came back. And then shortly after that, he died. So then we had one that was from local Dallas area. He just caught so much flack right after the whole deal. He moved to Florida. And then right after he moved to Florida, he died. So suspicious that so many of these people were outed on this deal. And they subsequently start, dying off, unfortunately. And we had one that was, this guy had been arrested more times than we could count for all kinds of stuff from Weatherford. But, and we had a guy that was living in Grand Prairie. He came over to meet a young boy. And then we had one that lived in Plano that was he was a character. He was the one you'll see on many of the episodes saying, I'm just out of my mind. I'm out of my mind. We had a building superintendent for a large company in McKinney. He showed up, and then there's a few others on here that we lost track of. But the one that really caught the national media attention, and it was so many lies were told about it, was Louis Conrad. And Louis Conrad was a former district attorney in Kaufman County, where he lived in Terrell. But at the time of this incident, he was the assistant district attorney, felony prosecutor for Rockwall County. Let's keep that in mind for a second. Remember I told you online solicitation of a minor is a felony. So here's a guy passing judgment on felony cases every day as his career, but what's he doing in the off time? So let me start out from the beginning on this one. We're in the truck, and one of the people come out from Perverted Justice, and they say, "Hey, we got a guy here that we believe is probably a high-profile individual." And I said, "Okay, what's the story?" He said, "Well, he graduated from Texas Tech, and he's a lawyer, and his name is Louis Conrad, who lives in Terrell, and that's what we know so far." And I said, "I'm going to need a little bit more information than that. I'm just make certain what we got before we move on that." So they go back in. They come back out several hours later, and they say, "Oh yeah, it's who we thought it was. All of our information's accurate, and we have a phone call with this guy, which you can find on YouTube." And it was just the phone call itself is, if you go to Perverted Justice's website and you can stomach going through the stuff and look under cases that were closed by other means, his case is in there. There's an audio file in there if you want to hear what this district attorney was saying to what he believed was a 14-year-old young boy. Okay, it will make you sick to your stomach. I'm just going to warn you right now. So after the third trip, they had enough information. We had everything that we needed documented, and this guy was scheduled to meet. This guy was coming to the house, and then all of a sudden, it was radio silent. He just dropped off the radar, and I was like, "Okay, just put that one on the back burner, and if he initiates contact, whatever again, then we'll pursue it." Well, at the end of the day, I took that particular case to the chief, and I said, "This is one that you probably want to look at because of who he is." And I don't know. I was supposed to be focused on the ones that came to the house, and this one was just out of the ordinary because of the fact of who he was and what he did for a living. It was almost like one of our own, if you will, in the police world, that we're supposed to uphold the law, but we're not supposed to do this kind of crap. And I know cops aren't perfect, but I mean, good Lord, when you get caught, you're caught. Okay, it was terrible, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. So, yeah, I took it to the chief, and after that, the chief made all the calls on that case. I did not have any input on that whatsoever. The next morning when we came in to start up again, because usually we didn't get started till, midday, 10 or 11, because, the perverts stay up all night and sleep all day. So anyway, the next day, I had been told that the chief and the lieutenant and one of the detectives was actually going to go down to this guy's house and arrest him. Because remember, you don't have to show up. You just have to show intent. And he'd already way past intent. I mean, I'm going to say this as polite as I possibly can and not gross anybody out. But if you go and listen to the phone call, this guy asked what he believed to be a 14-year-old boy if he could sodomize him. But he didn't say it like that. I made it polite, okay? He asked him the blunt way, okay? In a way that you would never think you would hear an adult talk to a child that way. I mean, it will make you sick to your stomach. I'm just going to tell you that right now. So they decided they were going to go get the guy. So, okay. So our takedown team, we go back to our location. We're business as usual. We still have a whole day of work to do. We still got people coming. There's things going on. Everything's happening. That is out of my league. That's out of my pay grade. That went over there. And so they go to the house, and the chief and them contacted Terrell PD. Terrell PD goes out. Turns out the sergeant that was on duty knew Conrad very well, Lewis Conrad, and had knocked on the door, couldn't get any response to him. I believe they tried to call him, couldn't get him to answer. They called a tactical team out. At that point, they breached the home, made entrance into the home, and he was met. Mr. Conrad was met in a room of the home, and he had told one of the responding officers, "I'm not going to hurt anybody," and put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. And then he was airlifted to Parkland Hospital from there, where he was pronounced dead. A forensic, of course, the search warrant for the home was issued, all electronic devices, everything like that. And keep in mind, this guy was the assistant district attorney to Rockwall County, which was the neighboring county to Collin County and a neighboring county to Kaufman County, where he lived. So, I mean, we were 3 consecutive counties right there in a row. The district attorney, which would have been Mr. Conrad's boss, was Mr. Sumrow. Mr. Sumrow made this big production on TV about what a sorry chief would go to this guy's house and do this when he could kill himself. You cannot predict that kind of behavior, okay? And for him to say that was a bunch of crap. But got on TV and made this big, long production about why the chief shouldn't have done this, and he should have called him, and he should have, they could have arrested him at the office, and just on and on and on. And when all reality was, what the public didn't know was that Mr. Sumrow was under investigation at that point in time for embezzling money from Rockwall County. So guess what? Whenever I don't know this to be 100% sure, but I have a very sneaky suspicion that Mr. Sumrow was very, very nervous because of the fact that that computer was taken out of Mr. Conrad's house. Keep in mind, these two work together every day. Mr. Sumrow got a 15-year sentence for the embezzling of the money from the county. He was accused of stealing $9,652 in computer equipment and money from the county account. He was also found guilty of diverting $68,000 in state money into his personal checking account. So it's really ironic to me that the media stuck a microphone in this guy's face and he had all this negative shit to say about our chief, when in fact he knew he was a piece of shit himself. He was doing all this dirty dealings, stealing all this money from the people of Rockwall County all the time. And who knows if this Mr. Conrad was involved in it or not. I'm not saying he was. I don't know, but it's just ironic that he was going to jump up and defend this guy when he was being a piece of shit on the back end by himself and then wound up going to federal prison for 15 years. So it's really funny to me how that somebody can stand up and preach to somebody, to a group of people, about how sorry somebody is for doing their job. And nobody could predict Mr. Conrad was going to take his life. That wasn't nobody had that. If anybody would have known that was going to happen, I can tell you right now, I know Chief Myrick personally and have for many years. He'd have never went over if he thought that was going to happen. I can tell you that with great certainty. And if he didn't live a state away, he'd be here on this podcast with me today. I can tell you, because that man's caught total hell over this whole thing for no damn reason. All he did was his job. It's the same thing I did when I took the idea in there to him. All we wanted to do was catch bad guys. That's all I wanted to do. That's all he wanted to do. And the fact that after all of this happened, Mr. Conrad took his life. What we found out was the reason he did show up to the house was because a family member of his showed up at his house unexpectedly and invited him to go to dinner, which he did. And that's why we've been able to figure out he didn't show up. Otherwise, we would have caught him at the sting, and maybe none of this would have happened. I don't know. And who's to say that we caught him at the house and then he makes bond, gets out, and goes home and kills himself? I mean, it's a totally different story. Are we still the bad guys? I don't understand how we, as police officers, doing the right thing, catching criminals on the street, getting them off the street, perverts off the street, but we were the bad guys. Man, we were called everything but a child of God over this deal. By some, not a lot, but not everybody. The media got a hold of it, and there wasn't a news station that wasn't picking up on it, and it was crazy. Everybody was calling for him to fire the chief, which they had no grounds to fire him. He didn't do anything wrong. Everything was done by the book. Well, then all of a sudden, that's when the district attorney in Collin County decided, we're not filing any of these cases. We're throwing them all out. You already prosecuted 4 of them. Why did you throw all these out? Was it because of Mr. Big Contributor that donated all that money to your campaign, Mr. Roach? Is that why you throw them all out? When you told me and Chief Myrick to our face, your lead assistant told us to our face, yes, we would prosecute them. Yes, just like we did the other 4. We'll prosecute them. No problem. It's kind of funny how that story, when the truth comes out, yeah, it took a while, but it was such a heated topic for so long that a lot of people were afraid to talk about it because, I mean, I worked there for 7 years. The chief that came in after Myrick, we were told without any uncertain terms, we were not to mention that ever again, that was a black eye that department took. How do you figure that? We were doing our job. We did what we felt was right and catching bad guys, catching perverts. And I said all along, if I could save one child from going through that, then it was all worthwhile. And I believe we did, because I'll tell you, we had a piece of crap detective that worked up there, and I'll say his name, Sam Love. Sorry sack of shit for a cop that ever lived. I'll say that, and I don't care. And if you know him, I'm sorry. But this guy was against this from the beginning. He just spread so many lies about this whole incident that it was just not even funny. And then we had another detective that worked there that both of these guys left and went to another department later down the road. And then when they left and went to another department, then they got on another news network and just trashed the department, trashed all of us. Like, I mean, unbelievable. Total lie on top of lie on top of lie. And it infuriated me because it made no sense. Why would you do that? If you didn't like something that the chief did, go tell the chief. Don't go tell everybody else. That's what's wrong with society today. And they didn't do that, though. They decided they were just going to hold all this stuff in and not say anything because the chief he had an open door. You could go in there anytime. I went in there before and aired it out with him. I may not always agree with him, and he may not always agree with me, but he would listen to you, and that was just what I liked about him. And so these guys really irritated me with that crap because they went out and trashed the whole organization after they left and told a ton of lies. I mean, a bunch of lies. One of the cases that I had originally got that was prosecuted, Collin County come back later and said that this guy actually lived on the border of Dallas and Collin County in Richardson, and that this particular case was going to have to be transferred to Dallas County, which meant because it was a felony, it was going to have to go back to the grand jury. Well, it happened to go to grand jury the week that I was off. I was on vacation. And so guess who they sent to the grand jury? They sent Sam Love, this guy I told you that just can't stand. So he goes in over there, and guess what? The Dallas County agrees to not prosecute this guy. They dropped the case, which infuriated me because Sam openly admitted that he told him that he didn't agree with this case. He thought it was entrapment, and he didn't like any of it. Although he was part of the entire operation. If you go on YouTube, he's a fat, ugly, bald guy that you see in the detective room wearing the ugly ass coats. And anyway, he was a real sack of marbles. Anyway, and I say that because this gentleman, for the lack of a better term, got his case dismissed, packed up, and moved to Louisiana. All right. And you think, okay, great. He's out of your hair. No, not great. About a year later, I get a phone call from a district attorney in Louisiana. I believe it was Jefferson Parish, if I'm not mistaken, telling me about a sexual assault case of 2 young girls. And I said, okay, why are you calling me? And they said, well, Officer Carter, we understand you arrested this gentleman for online solicitation of a minor. So he gave me his name, and I said, yes, I know who you're talking about. I said, this case was really personal to me because he should have been charged. He was charged. He sat in jail in Collin County before they realized actually where his address was, and then transferred the case, and then Sam Love screwed the whole damn thing up. And so now we've got 2, because keep in mind, what we were doing, there were no victims. There were no victims at all. This was a victimless crime, and we were able to catch people before there were victims, or if there were victims, we could stop them. That was the whole idea, stop these people. So now, because of this piece of crap police officer that wouldn't do what he was supposed to do, what he swore to do, uphold the law, and just go testify to the evidence and not give your personal opinion about crap because it's not warranted. You go by the letter of the law and police work. There's a lot of things about the law I don't agree with, but at the end of the day, you have to enforce whether you agree with it or not, okay? I don't always agree with the speed limits it's set, but you have to go by them. Doesn't mean I get to break the law and then go bitch at the police officer that writes me the ticket. It's not how it works. Anyway, long story short, the DA is talking to me about this case. This guy has been in jail for over 6 months, waiting trial. They said they've offered him a plea bargain, everything, and they've got him dead to rights, molesting 2 young girls to a young lady he was living with. She had 2 children from a previous marriage, and they were holding this guy on these 2 charges, but he would not take a plea deal, and they were getting ready to take this case to trial and wanted to know if I'd come testify. I said, you damn right I would, in a heartbeat. I'll drive down. Where do you want me to be? What day do you want me to be there? So long story short, she said, would you send me the case file that you have? I said, absolutely, which he's one of them. I had pictures of his penis. I had naked pictures of him. I had so many bad pictures of him. It was not good. Okay. So we FedExed the case file down, and I told her, I said, you just let me know whenever you need me to be there. So I went and talked to the chief, told him what was going on. He said, whatever you need to do, help them out, put this guy behind bars. And the chief's exact words, he said, the son of a bitch should have already been locked up anyway. Had it not been for the shitty police work of Detective Sam Love, this son of a bitch would have been in prison, and there wouldn't be no victims today, quote unquote. I agree. Anyway, Monday rolls around, and Monday is the court case. So I'm thinking, well, you've kind of waited too late. I know it's about a 5-hour drive for me, which I'll get up, but so I call. I can't get no answer to this lady's office. And finally that afternoon, my phone rings, and it's a Louisiana number, and I answer it, and it's her. I said, what? I've been worried because I I didn't know if you wanted me there, if I misunderstood something. I'm ready to testify. The chief has said whatever, I'm at your disposal. And she just busted out laughing. She said, "You are not going to believe what happened." I said, "Okay, I'm listening." She says, "Well, we went into court today, and he's sitting there with his defense attorney, and we explained to the judge that there was some new evidence that had just been made available to them via FedEx that morning. And so, because discovery had already been filed, which is a legal term, the DA has to show the defense everything they got, and vice versa, the whole discovery thing. I'm not an attorney, I just know that because I've been in many courtrooms as a cop. So they had to go through this whole process of why this wasn't disclosed in discovery, and the judge said, "Okay, under the circumstances, we understand," and so he allowed it. And the DA, she proceeds to tell me that she then stands up in court and says, "And by the way, we have Officer Carter waiting outside to testify." And the defense attorney says, "May I have a moment? May we have like a 5-minute recess?" And then he asked the DA, was the deal still on the table for I believe he got 5 years in Angola prison for the molestation of 2 children, which in my opinion wasn't near enough, but I guess that was a deal that was already on the table, but he took it. So, needless to say, I do feel better that my body of work, if you will, was successful to a degree. I was a little pissed off that the Collin County District Attorney's Office lost their spine when somebody stood up that was a donor, clearly, and decided not to prosecute these individuals when, according to the Penal Code 33.021, they were in violation of the Penal Code. So at what point does the district attorney get to pick and choose what cases get filed? I thought that was up to a jury the last I checked. Anyway, so Miss Conrad, Mr. Conrad's sister, she was all up in arms. She said that Mr. Conrad would have never killed himself had we not had a media crew in tow, and that it's been said that Dateline NBC was calling all the shots and this, that, and the other, and this was a media-driven event, and so on and so forth, and which is not the case. That was not the case. I can tell you that emphatically, without a shadow of a doubt. Dateline NBC and Perverted Justice didn't do nothing unless I said that person gets arrested, or that person, no, that's not enough evidence. It did not happen the way that they have told you all these years that it happened. And I will tell you right now, Chief Myrick and I have had this conversation many times, and we have always said we can both sleep good at night because we know our heart, our intentions were honest and true from the word go. This was never about being on national TV or anything like that. This was about catching bad guys and putting perverts in jail. And if we could put Murphy on the map to say, don't come here with this stuff because you'll go to jail. And if there was a young child that was in a chat room and they told somebody else they were in Murphy and that person had watched that episode, they might leave that child alone. Remember I said if it saves one child, it was all worth it? This is what I'm talking about. Because this could have paid huge dividends for many years to come had everybody handled it the right way. Had the district attorney done their job and prosecuted these yo-yos, we wouldn't have 2 victims in Louisiana that wind up getting sexually molested by this yo-yo. Most likely not. I'm going to say that because he'd have been a registered sex offender. He wouldn't have been as free to move around as he was otherwise. You had the individual that owned the McDonald's restaurants. He molested a child after the fact, and he and his wife were under investigation for HUD and mortgage fraud when he mysteriously died. Many speculate that it was potentially suicide, but I don't know. I don't know if the school teacher that we arrested. How many victims were there after the sting was done that could have been? We don't know. Nobody told us anything. It's the twink toilet guy that went to Australia with this young man and had sex with this young boy. He bragged about it to a coworker. That could have been prevented, because as a registered sex offender, you can't leave like that without. There's a whole lot that goes into leaving. It makes me sick to my stomach to know that politics got in the way of our justice system, and the victims of that were children, when this all could have been avoided if it had just done their damn job. But out of those 24 people, 5 of them have since passed away, one of them being Mr. Conrad. Like I said, he killed himself, and what the media didn't come back and tell you is when we got the forensics back on his computer and his cell phone, they found child pornography on his cell phone, on his computer. I've never been a pervert before in my life. I just want to know who the hell keeps child pornography on their damn cell phone. And keep in mind, every picture you are in possession of is 5 years in federal prison. Every picture. So that guy had 10 pictures, which I know there was more than that on there. I'm sure that's 50, 10 pictures, that's 50 years. So, why did he kill himself? Well, this is a guy that had sat on the opposite side of the bench from these defendants, just like this, and passed judgment on them. Put people just like himself in prison. Hypocrite. That's what I call him. But his sister thought it'd be best that she sued Dateline NBC and the city of Murphy, which Dateline NBC ultimately settled with her. I don't believe there was ever disclosed how much, but I think they did one more episode of To Catch a Predator, and then it was ultimately, it kind of outlived its life. But I believe perverted justice is still doing its thing. The last I checked, they were way over 500 convictions around the United States. But yet, Collin County, they have a higher threshold of prosecutorial evidence that they require, I guess. I don't know. All these other states can prosecute these people for it. The federal government can prosecute these people for it. They've prosecuted people for it. But because we caught somebody that was listed as a donor, this is speculation, okay? And I'll take the hit for that. Bring it on. Prove me wrong, though. You got one of your buddies caught. Now you're just going to toss the whole batch out because you don't like how it went down. Well, guess what? I'm going to close with a funny story out of this whole thing. And you're going to think, well, what the hell is funny about this? Well, when we got word back at the house that this incident with Conrad had happened, the chief had decided at that point to pull the plug on everything. It was done. So I went in the house. I told everybody, hey, this is over. Wrap it up. We had done 3 days of it. 24 people, actually 23, I think at that time, had been caught. And that was that. We're done. So we leave, all 6 of us there. We go back to the station, and we are at the station kind of going through a debriefing, and my phone rings, and it's Frag out at the house. Kevin, I got this guy. He's on his way from Houston. I was like, just, you know what, dude? I'm like, because Park Lane off of 75 turns into Betsy Lane in Murphy. So he said, yeah, he just exited Park Lane, so he's coming straight down to Murphy because we're right on the side of Plano. I said, listen, man, it's, everybody's tired, everything, all this other's just happened. We're still trying to process all this. Just tell him it's a sting. Just tell him it's a sting, go home. Lucky day, lucky break. Hang up. About 5 minutes later, he calls me back. Hey, man, this guy's, he's pissed now because he just drove here all the way from Houston and said he's not going home. He's coming to the house. I said, okay. So Chief had came in. I gave him a rundown on what was going on with this guy, and he just looked at me and he said, well, if that son of a bitch is stupid enough to show up, go get him. I said, okay. So I get him a squad car. I drive over to the neighborhood, and I'm about a block away from the house, and I just park. And I could see the street that they would have to turn off of to come down, but they couldn't see me. And I called, and I said, what is this guy supposed to be driving? He said, man, he's driving a blue Toyota 4Runner. Okay. Well, it wasn't just a matter of a minute or two, it seemed like. A Toyota 4Runner turns off of Betsy Lane into the subdivision. As soon as he turns, I pull right in behind him and light him up. I walk up to him. I said, are you so-and-so? And he says, yes. I said, I'm Officer Carter. Step out of the vehicle. I said, what are you doing here? And I said, they told you this was a sting. You're under arrest. I thought they were lying to me. I thought this kid got cold feet. So, I mean, that's called a Ray Jastai statement. He just admitted to what he was doing there. So placed him under arrest, impounded his vehicle, put him in jail. So can't fix stupid people. But anyway, that is the whole story, the truth, nothing but the truth. And like I said, if you go to YouTube, you'll see so many videos. And there's one out there from a yo-yo out in Great Britain or somewhere that done it. And none of his stuff is accurate. None of it. It's just like, I don't know who the hell he talked to, but his rendition or take on the whole thing couldn't be more false. His narrative is just false. What he got off of Dateline stuff was accurate, but everything past that is just absolutely wrong in so many levels. So anyway, I'm hoping, maybe at some point that this clears up. And a lot of people don't even know this story about me being a part of this and have put this whole thing together very early in my police career. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the body of work that the men and women of Murphy Police Department, Chief Myrick, and with the exception of Sam Love, everybody's got a turd in their house. That's just, he was one of them. But other than that, all the men and women that put in so many hours into this sting, there was men and women on that department that was willing to volunteer their time to help catch these perverts. And I couldn't be prouder of what we've done. And I can tell you right now, I still defend Chief Myrick to this day over this. He did what was right because I knew I was doing what was right, and all the men and women that were involved in it, they were doing what was right. They knew in their hearts it was right. Because I can tell you, if there was a cop in there that thought any of it was wrong, they would have stood up and said that. They wouldn't have just went along with this. We had seasoned veterans on that force. We had one of our detectives that was in there was part of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, seasoned homicide detective. This is a guy that I looked up to a lot, man, a great guy. I mean, had any of this not been right, I could promise you that gentleman would have stood up and said, it's a bunch of bullshit. And he would have called foul on it real quick. And so with that said, hit me up, straight up, kevincarter@gmail.com. I'm happy to answer any questions. I hope you have got something entertaining out of this. And if you have, hit that share button and share my podcast. Thank you again for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
It's the last thing we want to do. We don't want to scare anybody.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Straight Up with Kevin Carter. For questions or comments, contact us at straightupkevincarter@gmail.com. Until next time.